Wilson. I'm the chair of the New England region of the Association for Continuing Higher Education. I want to thank everybody for coming today, and I want to thank everybody who's participating online. The folks online, you can participate by typing your questions or comments, and we've got folks and ways to see how you're participating in here, so we want to encourage you to do that. We thought we'd do this because we know that CBE is a very hot topic these days, and lots of colleges are looking at doing that, and yet, at least from my minimal understanding, it really isn't a single thing. I know what a competency is, but this question of competency-based education is one I think we're still wrestling with. So we thought it'd be a great idea to have three folks from three different programs who are doing three different varieties of CBE come and just have a conversation about it so we can each learn a little bit more. I want to thank Kevin Bell for hosting, and Sasha Thackerberry for co-hosting, and Jane Pelletier, and Yvonne Simon, and Kathy Kaczorowski for being our panel guests today. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So it's great to be back on campus. For full disclosure, I was here from 2008 to 2012, and when I left, I thought, one day I'll come back to town, and LeBlanc's getting old, and Paddy Lynotte's always on kind of thin ice, so, I could but to come back as facilitator for an ACHE hour-long workshop is clearly, beyond all expectations. So I'm delighted to be back on stage with my former boss and a few other people who I've met and spoken to. So we're here today to talk about some alignment and evolution and advice from CBE practitioners. We're assuming some level of knowledge in the audience and those online, so we won't start from scratch. We all know that CBE is actually shorthand for My Provost Read an Article by Clayton Christensen. So we've got that all established. But according to EduVentures, they define CBE as an outcomes-based design for learning focused on the demonstration of knowledge and concrete skills acquired prior to or throughout an educational program. So we're going to look to the practitioners to really talk about, where they've gone from that. That's kind of the start point. EduVentures mentions in 1990 there were fewer than 50 colleges doing anything CBE defined. Currently there's about 150 with around 400 in some stage of development. So clearly this is a thing, it's a movement, and we're going to pose some questions, and first we're going to have the practitioners sort of explain in 3 to 4 minutes kind of where they're at, and I asked them to sort of yellow highlight anything that they feel is kind of special. So before we do that, Sasha needs to say hi, and she is going to formally introduce the panel.
Yes, and we do have a lot of comments by me online, so if anyone wants to add questions, that would be fantastic after we get into this. So we have Jane Pelletier from the University of New England. She is the Director of Academic Partnerships, and in that role, she oversees the development of basically all online program management, related activities, and she has been involved in non-traditional higher education for about 25 years, so she's an expert. And then we have our own Yvonne Simon from College for America. She is the Chief Learning Architect, which is just a fantastic title. I love that title. Former CEO and Senior VP of COCE, and before that, the co-founder and Executive VP of Six Red Marbles. And we have Kathy Kaczorowski. She is our Associate Vice President of CBE and SNU Excel, which is the SNU Excel version of CBE. Formerly of Rasmussen, she was the AVP of Quality and Innovation there, and also responsible for CBE there. And she is almost done with her PhD or EDD in Educational Leadership and Management at Cabela. Days away, right?
Days away.
All right, and back to Kevin for questions.
Okay. So we're going to ask each participant to sort of push on from that initial brief to describe the main outlines of their offering. So my sort of framing for that is, what stage is it at? Is this in development? Is it launched? Is it enrolled? Is it graduating? And also sort of give us a little bit of the why. Why was this something that your institution ventured out on? So we start with Kathy.
Great. So hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. The College of Online and Continuing Education at Southern New Hampshire University is quite large. And one of the things that we wanted to do is to understand how our outcomes based framework for our curriculum development could be kind of kicked up a notch into a more personalized approach that could help students accelerate through their program at a lower cost. So those were kind of some of the drivers that led us towards a CBE approach. Right now, we're in a small pilot phase and plan to continue that pilot for some time. We have about 60 or so students in the pilot, and the way that we enroll them is actually after they've started their traditional program. So we look at how successful they've been in a few foundational courses. They take a diagnostic into the specific courses that they are going to try to accelerate through. And they are able to move as quickly or as slowly as they need to within a term. So we still have a term-based approach. We've really worked kind of under the radar of a lot of some of the regulatory challenges and some of the more manual aspects of CBE in terms of trying to test within a small sandbox, so to speak, but still allow our students some flexibility and to be able to move more quickly through their program. So we're really in the learning phases, and so far it's looking good. So I'll tell you a little bit about that as we get into it, but we are a baby step into CBE.
Could I throw in one kink to that then and just ask you all to also just give us a couple of words on who the target demo is for this?
Yep.
Because I think that's also key when we frame these. Many institutions are going after different audiences for specific reasons.
Yep, our audience right now is our students who have already shown success, motivation, the desire to be self-regulated and self-directed, and who have already demonstrated an ability to be successful in their higher education. I believe that the audience that could benefit from this program is much broader than what we've started with, but this is kind of our first hypothesis about the population that would be successful in this model.
Great, thanks. Yvonne?
So hello, everyone. Really nice to be here and see so many familiar faces and new faces as well. Thank you. Kevin, I was going to say that going to the why, we read a book by Clayton Christensen. And actually, all joking aside, most of you know that Clayton had a big influence on the direction of the university and how we think about innovation. And when College for America was kicked off, it really was about going after the students for whom there isn't an option or who are not being served by the traditional model. So that why question was really important for the College for America version of CBE. And CBE really was part of the solution. We didn't start out to say, let's do CBE. We said, let's think about what's right for this group of students. And that's one of the pieces of the puzzle that we solved with CBE. And to highlight a few perhaps unique aspects, although I just learned that you have problem-based learning as well, project-based learning. We serve students through employer partners or community partners, so that's one very important thing. So we are not going after students who are in market who might be signing up for a COCE course or another online course. Students come to us only through employer partners or community partners. The second thing is the project-based learning. So students demonstrate what they know and can do through projects. And the model we have is a mastery model, and what that means is that you must master all of the criteria. So a 7 out of 10 is not mastery. You have to get mastery on every criterion, and it's a binary rubric. So you either get mastery or not yet. Multiple submissions, so students can submit as many times as they want. And this has really developed a really nice rigor for the program. So I think that's a really key piece of it. And the third piece I'll mention at a high level is that we sometimes say we unbundled the faculty role, which sometimes gets people a bit jittery. But really, the reason we did that, again, was to serve students the best that we could so that we have a coach and a reviewer. And those two roles, and we'll probably say a bit more about them as we go forward, are really focused on giving timely and targeted and personalized feedback to the students on both their academic work and their learning plan. So, and just maybe a bit of where we are, our official birthday is, it's always one of those things, how do you determine the official start date, right?
Kiss.
Maybe. So it's October 2013, and we have 6 programs. So we have a certificate, we have 2 AAs, and 3 bachelor's programs. They all stack into each other. And we have about 4,000 students. We should have about 5,000 by the end of this academic year. And what's really super exciting is we almost have 500 graduates. So,
Wow, yeah,
Pretty-
that's applause. I
Yeah,
think
that's pretty darn good.
500, that's
Thank you.
impressive.
I work for the University of New England, and UNE is pretty well known for degrees in the health professions, which was one of the drivers for picking health informatics for our first foray into CBE. I'm housed within the College of Graduate and Professional Studies, which is a newly formed college within the university, and was primarily for the purpose of putting our online programs underneath so that the policies, the service to students for online education would all be housed under one. So with that thought, that's where the CBE was housed as well. So we are in a pilot phase right now. It's also our first foray into undergraduate work. The College for Graduate and Professional Studies was really all master's programs within education, public health. We have a large contingency of students who come for science prerequisites. So those are non-matriculating students that want to get into med school. So we had some undergraduate online students, but not many that were matriculating. So we started with a small pilot. And as you were saying, it's really students who are not served necessarily by our other programs. So these are adults coming for degree completion. The assumption is that they will come with the first 2 years of their gen eds completed. So we are developing the competencies for health informatics only at this point. We partnered with external stakeholders, so there was a large community within the Portland, Maine area, which is where my office is based, and really that's where our population for the pilot came from. So the employers recommended a pool of employees. We vetted those, took a look at their academic, and admissions requirements, and launched the pilot in January. So we've learned a lot, so it's a subscription model. So students are coming for 4 months at a time, and that was by design because we're trying to really couch that subscription period within the academic terms for some obvious reasons of ease. I'm trying to think of what else might make it different. Again, it's the final 2 years. It's all project-based. Unlike what you were talking about, we have mastery but distinguished performance. So mastery is at a B. And so if you are really a distinguished performer and you are at that, you're above and beyond, then we do have the 2 categories, but there's a minimum threshold, as you said. You can submit your work multiple times for faculty, and I'll answer some questions later, probably about faculty model and the like. So pilot stage, we are hoping to go live in January, but again, we're really taking a look at what we've learned, what we're doing well, and what we could do better. So.
Great. Yvonne used to talk a lot about reinventing the plane while we were flying it, and we're all talking small pilots, so there's aviation themes across the board, really.
Yes.
So I wonder if you could tell us a little more, there are probably a lot of practitioners, including myself at my own institution currently, where we're thinking about CBE and we're in sort of development and we're having those discussions. And one of the first things that obviously comes up is the whole accreditation and that sort of approval process. So maybe just to flip the order, because I can. Jane, would you like to talk first about any sort of challenges you had there, or successes, or recommendations?
Well, we had to write quite a lengthy change request to NEASC, and that really required us to think long and hard about how we were admitting students, what were those general education requirements, particularly because, this is a disparate group of adults who are coming back, and even really paying attention to, upper division gen ed work within the competencies and how we were putting those in, what the student support would be like, what the faculty credentialing was, as we took a look at how we were going to group faculty around particular competencies. So that was really a very lengthy piece of work. The dean obviously was very involved. We have a director of pedagogy and assessment. He was involved in a director of strategic marketing initiatives who really works with the student support and enrollment retention folks. So that was quite a project. We went back and forth with NEASC before seeking approval. And we have some obvious they'll be back in a year to take a look. We also, NEASC is doing the university reaccreditation in 2017. So, there are some pretty high standards for us to meet.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we're also working with financial aid as an experimental site. And so, how does SAP work? What's that all about? So, It's been
talk.
yeah, we should yes, we should. It's been a learning process, but it's a pretty it really is a project putting that work together and required lots of collaboration.
Yvonne?
So related to much, if not all of what you said, very extensive project, if you will, lots of thinking involved. And the phrase that first came to mind when you asked the question, Kevin, was no stone unturned. Or my personal favorite is the thing that you ignore will become your limiting factor. So really thinking through every piece of the puzzle. And starting with the mission, I think this has already been touched upon, but who is this program going to serve is really critical, and why? And why is CBE part of the solution? I think is so important to do that work. And then going through the mapping exercise and really making sure that to really, because as we go through this as this movement comes forward, we want to make sure that it's a quality movement. So really making sure that your program has the right assessments, for your and this is not easy work. We've even found that instructional designers, for example, who are very solid in designing a more traditional course may not be able to do the development work in this model because it's really different.
And faculty as well.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So just an example there about things to consider and really nailing it down. And the process does insist upon that. So that's a good thing. And the other piece of the puzzle that I think is really important is just all the mapping, right? So for College for America, it was the degree profile, it was internal mapping with SNU, and then mapping to employer needs for College for America. That was another piece that we did. And then the other piece to highlight at a higher level is just make sure you have your student engagement strategy worked through, because one of the challenges we get in CBE world is, well, is this just a correspondence course? What kind of transformation is happening? And it turns out quite a lot is happening. But as you prepare for the submission, that's really a key thing to address.
So we're kind of an oddball in this group, as the way that we've approached it with the College for Online and Continuing Education is to really pay attention to those kind of boundaries of the regulatory space and be in communication with NEASC. But as ours is a course-based model and not an entire program, we have not yet gone through the substantive change process. But that doesn't mean that we haven't kept at the forefront the standards that we need to meet and the kind of expectations from that regulatory perspective. So one of the things that we've done to kind of maintain our current accreditation kind of blessing, so to speak, is to, we use the same project-based courses that we do in our traditional coursework. So that way we can be sure that the quality of the assessments are the same as in our traditional courses. And we also pay very close attention to participation expectations and faculty interactions with students to make sure that there's that regular and substantive interaction as students are progressing through. that's directed not just by the student, but also by the faculty member themselves. And because our model is a combination of really student self-paced work that they can read resources, take some computer-generated knowledge checks, but then ultimately be building to this larger project. We are working very hard to ensure that faculty are engaged throughout that entire process and not just at the very end when the student is all of a sudden submitting an assessment, that it's a kind of a coaching process along the way to ensure that the students have access to that kind of learning and kind of exchange opportunities with the faculty member. I also think that one of the unique aspects of the COCE model is the way that the Excel program is something that we're hoping to take bits and pieces that we're learning from and actually implement in our broader curriculum for our standard courses. So again, I say baby step into CBE, and it really is that kind of CBE principle that we're building on of some flexibility for the student to drive their own learning process, less of focus of attention on time and more focus on that mastery component. So some of the adaptive learning aspects that don't necessarily go outside of a regulatory requirement, but are somewhat more unique to online education are things that we're kind of experimenting with. So trying to put boundaries around how we're experimenting so that we're not necessarily working from the Clayton Christensen model of the disruption, but mini disruptions that we can then feed into the broader population.
So if I could dig a little, from my many tens of Twitter followers, I did get one question. Someone asked, and it's touching on something Yvonne mentioned, but also that Kathy's alluding to. The issue recently, the Inspector General sort of looking at one institution, Western Governors, and saying, okay, this faculty connectivity piece. So it seems like there's a couple of strategies, but give me a little more on this. The strategy one, encourage faculty, please be there. I know that can sometimes have success. And then the other one of maybe augmenting faculty with other presence. And I'm interested, is that other presence going to be accepted as in lieu of faculty, that's fine, or to augment? And can you talk a little bit around how is that a concern? I mean, is CBE now going to be blown away and this was kind of a waste of time, thanks for coming? Or is this just a sort of bump in the road that we can say, yeah, well, no, look, the faculty are substantially engaged, or our model means that others play a support role and that's good enough? Anyone who wants to dig in first?
I'll jump in if that's okay. One of the things, so Southern New Hampshire University is a member of CBEN, really has been driven by the College for America presence.
Could you explain what CBEN is?
Yes, CBEN is the Competency-Based Education Network, and it's currently a group of 30 institutions who are in some stage of CBE development or implementation, and this group really has had a very strong voice collectively in terms of really putting some pressure on the Department of Education, of other kind of perceptions and understandings of CBE, and really is a great place for networking and sharing and understanding of what other institutions are doing. So these kinds of conversations of how do you do that, and oh my gosh, I can't figure this out. What did you do to address that? Happen at CBEN. So one of the more recent focuses of CBEN is on case making. And that's really important, I think, for a model like CBE, which on one hand is very old, but also is very new in some of its faces, as we're sharing here today. And with the idea being that, the regular and substantive requirement isn't bad in and of itself, but a very kind of litigious reading of it can be constraining to the extent that it disallows creativity in design and delivery. It does serve to, some of the intention behind it, both as it relates to differentiating distance education from correspondence education, is to really ensure quality, as you mentioned earlier. So getting back to the case-making idea, I think it's really important for CBE institutions to be very clear with data, with stories, with kind of this explication of how are your students supported through highly credentialed, highly qualified individuals that either provide a presence as the courses are being developed or provide a presence as the assessments are being assessed and the feedback that is received is this kind of rich substantive feedback, or are offering support in different ways through an unbundled type of model. And so the more that we can tell that story, the more I think the less emphasis there will be on looking for bad apples and more kind of this shaping of the understanding of what it means to learn in a CBE space. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, I think one of the panelists talked about the coaching model, which I think, again, having, I got a little feedback, having faculty as coaches and mentors throughout, as well as connecting students with other students. So if you believe in how knowledge is constructed and you set up a community, then again, you're not just waiting to submit, I've just mailed it in or I've just deposited it into my LMS, that there really is that continuous feedback loop, and again, that students connect with each other, and that they're also applying what they're learning in the setting in which they're working. So it's multifaceted, I believe, and we've got a little bit of experience at UNE with that in the self-paced science prerequisite program. Again, that was the non-matric program where students can start every 2 weeks and the courses are self-paced. So building in discussion boards so that students can connect with one another even if they just started. But they're also, the faculty is meeting that student where he or she is. So it's a little more complex than just saying, I've just mailed it in. So I think if you're paying attention to that and you're understanding how your students are learning and you're meeting them where they are, the model makes sense.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on what you're saying. I love the overview you gave of CBEN and how case making is so important to the movement, if we're allowed to call it that. It's really, it's certainly something one has to address, and also what I connected with is if you respond to it, let's put it this way, it's best responded to as a challenge, I think, right?
Yeah.
So that if your model is sound and students are learning and they're being supported by qualified subject matter experts, which I think is true in all of these cases, how do you substantiate that with data, with stories, as you were saying? And so one story we often cite is that our students, for example, they're connecting with reviewers for each project. So the reviewer will, it's usually an average of 2 submissions, 2 to 3 submissions, depending on the program, project, et cetera, et cetera. But the students can also ask reviewers questions. So think about how much substantive dialogue that is with a subject matter expert. Many of our students have been not in college, first of all, but if they have, they maybe been in large lectures. How often do students raise their hands? So this is a kind of dialogue that I think has a lot of value, and we're trying to make the case around that. We have also added goal mentors very recently. Our community also really wants to foster a lot of peer-to-peer. The example I always give is that if you're learning to sew and you want to, struggling with how to get this button on, you want to go to the person, the student who's just learned how to do that, not the master tailor, right? So just really being clear about what these different roles are, the purpose that they serve. And we'll see with goal mentors. It will be very interesting to see if students show up. Goal, sorry, I wasn't clear. Yeah, so will they show up? So we have goals that sort of defines our project bundle, if you will. Little technical jargon, sorry. But those subject matter experts will be available to students and in dialogue with them. So we'll see how that goes, but that was one of our responses.
I think that's really interesting. Something that we've seen quite a lot is this concept of expert blind spot, which ironically sometimes a faculty member is not the best person to address because they got their PhD 20 years ago, they're doing research, and I'll say, I've forgotten that I actually had to take steps A, B, and C. So as you say, someone who's walked through, I've not heard the goal mentor before, quite like it. But as often happens with something new, it has to kind of defend and explain itself and document itself more than something that's been established. So that's interesting. Another question that does come up a lot for those of us who are looking at this is the transfer credit question, which, having worked with Yvonne, I remember we were thinking, well, why would anyone want to transfer out of this program? It's so good and it's so brilliant. And it is. But there is that. So a student who starts in CBE, there's two ways. Someone who starts a program somewhere else and comes in, I think that's easier to think about with prior learning assessment, that kind of thing. But the other way, so someone starts a program and says, for whatever reason, this isn't for me, and I've been working at this for 6 months, and I have all these competency things. So could you talk a little about how that maps to a traditional transcript and whether you've had any issues with that?
Well, I can start because it's just very new. And again, this is a pilot, so we spent a long time trying to figure out what we were going to do. And at the University of New England, most courses are 3 credits. So even though we were trying to get away from the Carnegie model, that we ended up saying that a competency would be the equivalent of 1/2 credit. So, and then we kind of couched those within courses. So they're not really courses in that you don't have to finish each competency. You might do a few in the area in which you know the most, and that's where you want to start. But they are bundled at the end. But they are all listed on the transcript. We're still working through this. I told you it was a pilot. So again, we're working with internal stakeholders. What does that transcript look like? What happens if they want to transfer and they've got a 1/2 credit here, a 1/2 credit there? Or the transcript is 25 pages long because they now have,
And are your competencies course specific? So if I take a competency in X, is that just chalking off 1/2 a credit within one course, or can it also be competency, something like critical thinking that's in 12 courses?
No, because it's the final 2 years of the bachelor degree, so it's highly specific to health informatics. So they really are tied
Right.
to a particular course. So you may have disparate sorts of competencies that you've done, or you may work toward the competencies all in one area so that when you're finished, you have what's the equivalent of 3 credits. So and we're trying to get feedback from students on how this is working. Again, just started in January, so we're just completing our first subscription period. So that's, and should it be a separate what am I thinking of, transcript, or should they have them,
Melded.
be one?
Yeah.
common?
So one of the things that we
and
came
can
up with.
can
Yeah,
I just
please,
say-
go ahead.
The last
Yeah,
thing I was
yeah.
going to
I'm so
say,
excited. I
oh
know
no,
you're excited.
me too, and the last thing I was going to say though about that is how do you put mastery and
Yes.
demonstrated or distinguished performance? So again, do we put down that that's equivalent of an A or B, or because we looked at maybe just having 2? So
Yeah,
anyway, I
we
just
went
wanted to
through
throw
that
in.
same
Yep.
dialogue and trying to figure that out. So what we ended up working through and coming to with CFA is that we do have 2 documents of record. So one is an unofficial document that does list all the competencies that the student has mastered in the program. And students and employers love this, right? So it's not the A or equivalent in
Just detailed
X
what they've
course,
done.
it's the student has mastered these competencies, and that's really resonated very nicely. That said, we didn't want to limit students, and we want to see students move to the next best option for them. So if they complete the AA, College for America, for example, we want them to have choices about where to go, and so we need to make that process easy. Otherwise, we've repeated the same mistake again, right? We've limited student choice. And so we said, okay, how will we do this? So we do map to SNHU courses based on our goals. So that probably requires a whiteboard or a slide or something to really get at. But I think you get the idea, so that students could have a transcript that looked familiar. And we do have students who have transferred, so it works. Some of them transferred to here, so that was pretty easy. That worked out well. And how we handled the equivalencies and grades, so because it is a mastery model and students have to master all of the competencies, we have an MA as the grade, right? And then on the back there's a key, and MA is equivalent to an A. But you have one more step. So
Well,
that
I
makes
was
it
just
trickier.
suddenly thinking, because it really
Yeah.
is like the, nesting dolls, that what happens if at the end of a subscription period that the student has attempted and is in the middle of a competency?
We have to talk
So
offline
the-
for that.
So
But
there's
yes,
lots of
Blackboard.
things to think about.
Yeah, good for
Yeah,
you for
yeah.
getting to that one at this stage, because it will happen, and you'll write a policy,
Right.
and it will be lovely.
Thank you.
But it will work out.
Yes.
Yes.
Kathy, you want to go on this one?
Yes, I have a much simpler description. We use grades. We do have an algorithm kind of on the back end as the assessment is being developed and as the students are being assessed that helps to specifically identify the objectives that they've mastered within that assessment, but then it magically turns into a letter grade based on that algorithm. So on their transcript, the student will receive A, B, whatever they've earned, and in this model, students can fail, so they can turn in an assessment and be awarded an F based on their performance. That being said, they can resubmit their projects as well. So we have found that about 35% of our students in the first term did resubmit and increase their performance on the assessment. But in the end, it all comes out on the transcript looking like no different than a traditional course, and that eases the transfer both in and out.
So can I ask a question? So,
I'm losing this.
what,
Mutiny.
so how does is this algorithm transparent to students?
Yes.
Or how do they see?
It's in I believe it's in the syllabus, the way,
Okay.
just like a grading policy would be in
Okay.
a, in a
Work at the same
standard
time.
course. Yeah,
They're at the same
And-
institution. So it's
and
good.
it is actually the same grading
That's why we
policy.
do these things.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
the same grading policy.
So just to
Thank you.
confirm, so you need an algorithm or a whiteboard, or you need to take Yvonne Simon to lunch. That's the way that you again, sort of building on that, because there's some method in the madness. That all sounds like it's going to obligate issues for those of us at institutions with, I don't know, Banner and Blackboard. So could you talk a little about the technical or the systems, if you want, back to the people, which I assume is registrar financial aid, but what have you been able to do with sort of standard systems, and what have you had to go beyond and invent new systems for?
Well, we are a design partner with an LMS, so we are not using Blackboard for this particular program. We do use Blackboard for the others that we have within the college. And we do have Banner, but right now, Banner is not integrated with the LMS, so there are manual processes that we've really had to solve, and we are in the process of solving
Is
them.
it an in-house LMS, or can you share the name, or is it a secret?
No.
No one's listening.
We have 17 people online.
Alex.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Great
it
deal
really
of danger at this point.
Well, it's not a secret. We are using Motivus. We are a design partner, so it means that we are helping them to put some things together. They're helping us in shaping things up. And so that's worked well in some areas. There have been other things that we have wanted that aren't there yet. So we've had to do some work internally to
Right.
get that to work. And so that's been a learning experience, I think, for all of us at the college about that. We also just are implementing Salesforce. So how Salesforce and Banner and Motivus will all integrate. So that work is all going on at the same time that we're figuring this out. So we're pretty busy. No 2 days are the same. But it's important because that's a tool for students, and you don't want that tool or that technology to be getting in the way of the learning. And at the same time, there are internal processes, like the registrar's office, like financial aid, that really have to keep the plates up in the air. So, so that's been a challenge, and because there's a financial challenge to it as well. This was an initiative that came out of the Gates grant. The president is really on board with it. So that support has been good. But again, you have challenges. We've got an IT department that wants one thing, we're looking at something else. So there's lots of work around that.
Snoobies?
Best.
So this is often a happy topic of conversation. Everything is manual.
You're welcome.
And we do use Blackboard, but we work within Blackboard for the SNU Excel courses in a kind of platform within a platform to actually create the learning path experience for the students. And so and that platform within the platform doesn't talk to Blackboard. So there's a lot of things that the faculty have to do manually right now to look at where students are progressing and where they're not, and how does that correspond to their assignment. And and that's just the LMS piece. We have had to do some workarounds to get the sections for these courses, since they are the same as the sections for the traditional courses, identified from the SIS perspective. And then even just tracking the students from an advising perspective of, because the progression is so different, it's not a weekly progress anymore, it's the students moving according to the learning plan that they've set, but how do we track that, and how does the faculty know, how do the advisors know, how do they, so yes, it's a lot of people working with people to figure this out, but one of the purposes, I think, for this pilot at COCE is to help us figure out how can we then translate the people process into system process,
Yep.
knowing that the technology may be lagging a bit, but like you're saying, working with a design partner to help push them in the direction that we need to go, that certainly is something that we could benefit from in the long run, is if we're not satisfied with the manual aspect, but try to push into a systems approach and bring the technology with us, as hard as that feels right now.
So I have one more, and then we're going to open
Do
it
you
up.
want me to?
Oh, I thought you'd defer.
No, I just wanted to, see the lay of the land before I jump in. I'm happy to
Okay.
jump in on this one, just because I think it's addressing these questions that really makes you realize this is very, very much pioneering work, right? Because the current systems don't address the student experience the way it needs to be addressed, and it doesn't really create a learning, I don't want to even use the word environment, doesn't create the conditions for learning to happen in the way that, I think you were saying this, that we really want them to happen, and we know that they happen best. So I think it really is an opportunity for innovation. And so people may know that Motivus actually was informed by the work of College for America. So we actually did some student prototyping. So we worked with the Business Innovation Factory early on. I think that was even before the birthday, to really understand, right, how students came to the degree. And that sounds very strange. That probably wasn't the best sentence, but really it was, what we were trying to understand is, how did students who are out of market, who really didn't think college was an option for them, what did they want to feel like when they were part of a school or college, if that became an opportunity? And so we really learned the importance of having a system that really had some component that helped students belong, right? Very important. We all know that as educators, that's so important. And so as the development progressed, that became something we really tried to get at. We also knew it had to be targeted and timely. Like, students don't want to wait around for things. Students, when we ask for specific feedback on College for America, it's like, well, it takes 48 hours sometimes to get our feedback. We want it more quickly. And okay, well, a good example, right? So even though it's much different, but it really starts to get at what could learning look like, what could learning systems become moving forward. And I think this is incredibly exciting. It is painful work still, because even with all that opportunity to think about a new platform, to think about how we want it to look and feel, how we want the student experience to be, it still requires ongoing efforts, because new problems and challenges emerge on a daily basis, as you say, and we're continuing to learn. And I think the key is really to keep students at the center, and it's one of those things, everybody says that, but how do we develop systems that continue to get student response and coach response, faculty response, wherever your users are, back into the system, and how do you keep responding to that? How do you figure out what the appropriate response times are? So that, data is really a big part of that. And I think we need a dinner to do data, because that's a huge, it's
That's
almost
about
become
the
another...
It's 11:45, so.
That'll be the next.
It's so important
Yeah.
to everything, because as you were describing all of that, we've really started to work on prototyping what that looks like, and I think we're making some progress, so I'd love to share that with anyone.
So I
who's
knew I shouldn't have let Yvonne answer,
La, la,
because
la,
she's
la,
just
la.
answered the question I was about to ask, which is very clever. But just to sort of wrap up this part of it before we open it up, that's a question that really interests. I think, there's a clear set of indicators for the extrinsic motivators for students to do this. They need the degree, they need the career progression, et cetera, and affordability is another extrinsic. But that question of intrinsic motivation, I know it's a concern for the traditional house that, are the students kind of by themselves? Is there anything in the platform? I know some of the SNU guys have done some work looking at kind of gamification or gameful design. Could you just do a quick wrap with why, when students get to your platform, are they going to stay and not just back out? Because we know the target demo in many cases has so many challenges.
Yeah, I think it's one part platform for us. We have the benefit of the employer community as well, so that really plays into it. We noticed that employers were more supportive of their students in the programs. Some employers have actually tied it into performance evals, so this becomes tricky a little bit, but it really makes, for some of those transitions to identifying as a student, feeling like you're a consumer. I love this idea that students will become better evaluators of the product that they're getting, of the educational experience that they're receiving, and maybe demand more of us. And I think the other part is the peer-to-peer we mentioned before, really, really important. Must focus there. And then one of the things that I think we didn't anticipate was the reaction to the not yet. So it sounds great, I can submit as many times, but I think you've all either crumpled up a paper with a bad grade on it or seen your kids stuffed in a drawer somewhere, and really to have to process that and to work through it and say, okay, this is feedback not about me so much, but my work, and how to work through that struggle, normalize the struggle is part of what we talk about in that process. And that's part coaching, too. So it's really all of these pieces working together, and guess what? No surprise to anyone here, it's different for different students. Some students need more of the peer, some need more of the reviewer, some need more of the coach. Some are pretty darn independent. So it really depends, and I think lots of learning, lots of really exciting learning. One of my challenges moving forward is, can we just figure out what the secret sauce is anyway? I mean, really, I think we can. I think it shouldn't be a secret. We should understand it, and we should be able to deliver on it and have expectations around it. It's magical for sure, but can we really understand better?
Jane, any secret sauce?
Well, I was going to say, I don't think we have enough data, because we literally just started with this group in January, and we're just finishing with this first subscription period. One thing that we noticed, again, our biggest worry was, are students not going to engage with the material, with the, with this whole new way of learning? And it took a while for this group to, in the beginning, they were not progressing as quickly as we wanted them to, and we were putting together sort of a targeted academic plan, and then, more coaching and more student support, and, really kind of high touch. It took them a little bit of time. I think the next group, we're going to have this first group come back and say, if I were in your shoes, what did I wish I knew? And I think it just took a while. There was some trepidation. It just wasn't what they were used to with a classroom. So, and the fact that they were, really doing this at their own pace, so that made them a little bit nervous. So right now we're surveying them to get some feedback, and some of the people, there were a couple that just flew, so they were just flying through the competencies, but then most of the others were really tiptoeing. And so, we're trying to gather some data on that. Is it the technology? Is it that they've been out of school a number of years? Is it that they are working adults? And even though they are certainly, they have the support of their employers, because that pilot group was employer-based. So I'll have more for the next video.
So I would like to open it up. I know Sasha's got a couple of questions that she's seen, but you guys actually showed up. So anyone want to shout one out
Oh,
from the
snap.
floor?
Online attendance matters too.
Online attendance, thank you for coming.
And just to segue actually a little bit to address one of these ones that came in a little while earlier, there may be more than one secret sauce, right, for different types of students, you know, many types of ketchup, as Malcolm Gladwell would say. So we had some questions about these different faculty models and the different terminology surrounding them and what those roles mean. Can we just briefly go through and what are the terms that you use and what does that mean in the context of your CBE program?
Well, just quickly, we have the subject matter expert. Those are the folks that are working with our instructional designers on the competencies. We have student success coaches. Those are the people that are working with the students to really kind of mitigate some of their, you know, life events and challenges along the way. We have faculty coaches. We thought about, but haven't yet pulled them apart. So the faculty member that is coaching is also assessing. I think that's really the roles we have, obviously admissions and enrollment folks, but that's a little more traditional.
So we have some overlap with what you're describing. So for us, the unbundling is made up of the subject matter experts, so our curriculum and assessment developers. The reviewers, as I mentioned, those are the people who specifically give feedback on the student work, so they deal with the what. Like we have the criteria and have they met that. And then it's, you know, we really thought about a separation of church and state, if you will, right? So the coaches are really concerned with the how, right? And then we do have some roles developing in the community. So we have student ambassadors now and community coordinators. And then, as I mentioned, new goal mentors. And those are very new. So next time I'll say more about those.
We also have subject matter experts who work with our instructional designers and our curriculum designers to work on unbundling our course outcomes into objectives, so that kind of competency level, and working with our vendor partners who help to curate the content for the course. And like I said before, we use the standard assessment. That's a project that is the same course as the standard course, so that's already there. And we do right now just have one faculty member serving as both coach within the learning process and assessor. And that is in some ways by design, but also because we're so small, it's really difficult to have one person doing the instructional work with the student proactively and another person only focused on assessment when you just have 30 to 40 students. But as we scale, that separation of church and state potentially makes more sense. So we're really just exploring that right now, what that might look like.
As are we. We have a small population.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning that got me thinking about how we've evolved. And there are a lot of checks and balances under the hood that have come about as well for QA. So I didn't mention those, but that definitely requires a flow chart. But they have evolved, and I think that was actually a good way to go because then you really see where they're needed.
Yeah.
Very cool. We also had a very interesting question, and I know this speaks a little bit to terminology and granularity of competencies, which I know has quite amount of variation in the field, but we had a question about the broad competencies. Are competencies only hit once? Are they viewed as prerequisites? Are they built upon? Are they hit multiple times? How does that work in 2 minutes? No, I'm kidding. But I hope we may have some questions from our studio audience.
We're in the punchy,
as well.
punchy section.
Yes.
Go
Well,
punchy.
I could just say quickly that the competencies are met multiple times in some areas. Some are met multiple times. What was the other?
Prerequisite pieces,
Definitely
standards for them.
prerequisite. Some are prerequisite to other competencies. Yeah, definitely, yes.
So because degrees stack, you could say that they're met multiple times. short answer in terms of whether they have prerequisites. AA, no. BA, yes. BA has a capstone. Bring it all home. And did I miss any part? Is there something else?
Well, can you speak a little bit about the mastery, the yes/no again?
Oh,
and
sure. The binary
Right.
aspect of it. So for each criterion in the rubric, students either receive a mastery or not.
And that's what they need to get to before they can move forward.
Well, our students in our program do not have to complete an entire project, so they might, and most of our students would have multiple projects that they're working on at the same time. So they might be in a revision stage with one and just starting another. That happens quite a bit.
Okay. So there's overlap.
Yep. And we, our outcomes-focused curriculum already has program outcomes and course outcomes that sit underneath that, which are integrative and cross-cutting across the curriculum. So you would see repetition and kind of moving into different stages of mastery of each competency, so to speak, as you work through a program. So the courses that we've selected for this new Excel model have the same course outcomes as our standard courses. And one interesting, I'll say, challenge that we've encountered is that as we're taking those broad integrative course outcomes and finding the granular pieces that make them up, because the course outcomes are so kind of integrative and holistic, those objectives may also fit in even just one course. They may hit a number of different course outcomes. So there's a big kind of three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle of how it all fits together. And I would say if we have this conversation in 6 months, I will tell you that we're working on our curriculum slightly differently because of how we've learned of how we're defining the pieces that make up the learning and how they all fit together, and how really we ensure that the student is indeed mastering at the end of the day. You know, it really is all about, can the student know and do things? And so what the best route to get there is, I think we're all kind of figuring out as we go.
Great. So Mark has a mic. Does anyone have a question? We've got another couple.
Questions here.
No pressure. So, what sort of knowledge of CBE do you find your students have coming into your program, and how are you having to educate them on the process?
Question.
That's a good question.
That is a good
I mean, I'll just jump in. I think we're, again, in a pilot phase trying to determine that. I think that, I mean, we probably all in this room have a different idea of what CBE is in some ways. So I think it's really been all over the map. And so what does CBE mean at the University of New England? And is that the way that maybe I as a student learn best? And I think that's maybe why for our students in this pilot that they started off relatively slowly. I think it was a bit of a shock. And I don't know whether that was a good shock or a bad shock, but because nobody left. But I think they had varying expectations of what it would be, and we really want to try to capture some of that for the next, not only orientation, because then they've already been accepted, but is this really the best place for them?
Yeah, and when I was hearing your comment before around students starting slowly, we had the same experience, and we were getting better with each iteration at introducing students, helping them to understand what this is.
Yes.
And it does take a while. You know, we're all familiar with many of these terms, and still we're learning and finding out more. So for students, it does take quite a bit of explanation and work to get there, but we're getting better at it. And one interesting thing that we've noticed with the BA that hasn't been around as long as the AA is that students who transfer in the block of credit from the AA, rather than having moved from our CFA AA into the BA, if you will, they take longer. And that's a harder entry point, actually, because those projects are actually more rigorous. So that's a challenge that we have right now, is how to better orient students who've already got that game down a little bit. They've already had college level work. They figured out how to do that, and now they're coming up against or engaging with a system that's unfamiliar. So we're working on that.
And we actually don't don't really use the word CBE a lot
Mm.
with our students. We
Mhm.
instead
Great point.
describe it in natural language, if you will. So talk about how it's flexible, it's personalized. You don't have to repeat stuff that you already know. You get to move at your own pace. So all of those things I think are important to help the student understand what they're getting into. And we actually had the opposite situation with our first batch of students where they moved very, very quickly through the kind of computer machine learning part of working with the learning path and getting resources and taking knowledge check quizzes and zoomed through that. And then, oh my gosh, there's a project. Oops, I didn't plan very well. So it's almost the self-directedness that our students, even though these are all the cream of the crop students that we're working with in this pilot, that we need for our second round of students, I think we've done a much better job helping to connect the project at the end to the process along the way so that it isn't a two-stage experience. You're always thinking about the end in mind, and really focusing on that planning for the students so that they can, even if they have to change their plan, they can be very mindful of, this is what it's going to take me, this is what I need to do for myself to work within my life and my kids and my job and all the other things that have to balance, so that they can get to that self-directed state.
Cool. I think we have time for one very quick one, because I know we had an audience member. Go.
Would you mind sharing your thinking around who the ideal CBE student is? So this idea of students coming in, improving their competency right from the start versus, learning and helping them coach to get to that point. Just curious where your thinking is on that.
That's another good question, and I'm hoping some feedback from the pilot will help. I think anecdotally, and again, I don't have the data, it is someone who's highly self-directed, who is, I think, time management is important. I think also the idea that that they're able to access materials and sort of assimilate easier. I think sometimes students are so used to, I go in, I sit down, I'm in this chair for a certain amount of time, and that this is such a completely different idea for them. And for our students in this program, because it's a degree completion, they've been out of school a while. So I guess I would think the ideal student is better able to manage time and is self-directed to an extent.
So we have a slight difference in our program because we take on the challenge of developing self-directed learners and meeting students where they are. And many of our students don't have good time management skills necessarily. And one of our students quipped that she had no calendars before she started CFA, and now she uses 3. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Maybe a room for technology innovation there. But I think, and I borrow this from our coaches, any student who wants and is open to change, even just a little bit, right, who's really ready to take on that next right-size challenge and open to receiving that feedback, even though they go through a process of learning as they do so.
And I would just end with, I love what you've been saying about being very student-centered and user-driven as you've designed the CFA programs. And I think CBE as a concept can meet the needs of lots of different types of students, and especially in many ways the underserved population that has been in the workforce and has lots of skills and competencies they haven't gotten credit for yet. But I think when you're designing a CBE or any program, you really have to decide who do you want to serve and build the program and the process around that type of student, because different students need different things, and maybe that's your model, that you serve lots of different students, and so you have lots of different ways of different students to access those different things. But obviously that's complicated, but I think making sure you are very clear about who is it that you're trying to serve and how can you best support them in the learning process is really key.
Great. We are at time, so we have to wrap. I just want to thank the ACHE guys for setting this up and to Southern New Hampshire for hosting.
Thank you.
And I'm going to punt to Sasha and Mark to really finish it up.
And I have 2 shout-outs. Chris wanted to say hi from online, and
Chris.
Susan, whose last name is there. But thank you, Mark,
Susan.
please.
Well, thank you all for coming. So obviously, this is an ongoing conversation, and you already have given me the idea for the title of the next episode. It'll be The Many Faces of CBE, The Data Dinner. Right? So thank you all for coming. And speaking of dinner, there is lunch. We can continue the conversation. Those of you online, you can have your lunch as well, and we will continue the conversation. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you all. Pretty good. Well done. Thanks. Are we still online? You can't do a cool mic drop with this.